Okay, and welcome everyone to the work session for the Office of Public Integrity. I will, as you know, we have a piece of legislation related to the Office of Public Integrity that's currently in the Finance Committee that's currently being held. This work session is to learn more about this legislation. I want to turn it over to, is the mayor on?
Yes.
Madam Mayor, I don't know if you wanted to make any comments about the legislation and turn it over to Mr. Ware.
Yes. So a number of years ago, Tim our OPI director had looked at trying to elevate the office to an inspector general office. Inspector General office is something that many cities have around the country. And so he did a lot of research. He went to a lot of IGA trainings. And given what we have seen lately here, it resurfaced again with OPI and transition it to a more structured program or more structured department, one that is more has a fixed term, more independent, and has the ability to do some reviews that it currently doesn't have. We reached out to Bloomberg organization. We talked to the former mayor of Philly, who recommended that we speak to the former IG of Philly, who now works for Bloomberg. They gave a number of different recommendations on, how to actually transition and to get a department that has the independence that it needs to get the investigations going, have the authority that it needs in order to compel, certain testimony and investigate certain aspects of the city. Currently, of course, OPI has no foresight in some departments within the city, and this would give them the ability to move into that direction if they so choose. Or if we so choose. But we wanted to put forth legislation to discuss this, to make sure that we are aligned with best practices across the country, and to review what current IG offices across the country for cities have the power to do. And so, and to become an accredited IG office. So wanted to turn that over to Tim to explain, to answer any questions that you may have, because I think that is important to have an IG's office that is accredited to do the work that we would like for it to do. So Director Ware, if you wanted to go through and answer any specific questions that council may have.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I think you did a great job kind of setting some of the background. So I won't try to kind of repeat some of that, but I have a few slides if you don't mind. I know, you guys see PowerPoints all the time, so I tried to keep it real short just to hit the highlights. I know you have the legislation in hand in more detail, and I'd be happy to answer any questions specifically, but if you don't mind, kind of bear with me. I'll try to share my screen, walk through a couple issues that I just want to highlight, and then we can kind of take it in whatever direction that would be most helpful to you. So let me try here.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, you guys see that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about Association of Inspectors General. It's a non-for-profit organization that I've been in touch with, like the mayor said, for a number of years. And then we'll go into some of the highlights of the legislation, number 394, just a brief overview, and then just 3 or 4 main differences, between, because obviously the question would be, what changes from the Office of Public Integrity to a newly created Office of Inspector General, and then address any questions that you might have. So the Association of Inspectors General, basically just kind of 3 points here. It's a national organization, based out of associated with the John Jay College. They're an accreditation organization, like the mayor had mentioned. They provide training and certifications a few years ago. I attended their certification course to become a certified inspector general. They also offer training certifications for inspector general investigators and inspector general auditors. So a couple other things they do, they provide guidance and support to municipalities around the country, both local municipalities, state, and even federal agencies, to provide guidance on how to either create an IG or to strengthen the inspector general's office that already exists. The one thing that I've learned in the years that I've been looking at this is that if you've seen one inspector general, you've probably seen one or two, only because these are all recommendations and standards and what I would call best practices. So, but really it's up to every community to decide, the elected officials and the public to decide what, one, do they want an inspector general, and two, what tools and what do they want it to be? What type of jurisdiction do they want it to have, and the authority they want it to have? So there is some varying degrees of, when you look around the country trying to benchmark these type of things, there's some differences. There's also two ways that IGs are created. One by executive order by the elected official, and then the other through legislation, which we're putting forth here. And certainly the legislation, I think, is the most preferable way to go. The stronger, sets a stronger foundation for the office. And that is the recommendation of the AIG. So, you know, their mission: advance integrity, accountability in government through some kind of independent oversight. And, you know, that word independent we'll hear a couple of times. And I know everybody has different views on what does that really mean. So we certainly can have some kind of discussions about that. And then I think BJ had sent out today, there's a manual, it's called the Green Book, the Principles and Standards for Offices of Inspector General. That is the accreditation. Those are the standards by which we would build an IG. You know, at this point, there are standards for IG offices, which even though I went through the school, the OPI doesn't adhere to. So what we did was took the standards for investigations in the book and we adhere to those. But, you know, because of our structure and because of some of the tools that we don't have, they don't consider us falling within the standards of an inspector general's office based on their view. So, but that's it's a 50 pages. I know, you know, if you want to kind of delve in there on your own time, if you have any questions, please reach out. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. So, what do they really include in this manual? What they want the statute to include would be some of these items. Basically, the mandate, you know, the mission. What is the mission of an office inspector general, in which we set forth pretty clearly, you know, in the legislation, I believe in the first paragraph. And then get into some clarity and specifics about what's the OIG's authority and what are its powers in some level of detail, which in my experience is important, right? Usually oversight offices or investigative offices, you know, when they look into something, they have really two parties that are talking to them. They have one party that says, we want you to investigate this. We feel like you should. And they usually have another party, in my experience, that says, we don't think you should, and we don't think you have the power or authority to, right? So at least in my tenure here with OPI, what I've tried to do is respect both of those voices, and I have to be able to speak to both of those, right? I think more clarity in the legislation, whatever it turns out to be, is certainly a benefit to anybody that holds this office and works in this office. It helps us speak to why we're investigating or auditing or reviewing a particular matter. Independence, obviously in legislation, we want to set forth independence. We'll talk a little bit about some of the things in this legislation. You know, what level of independence is important. Is anybody truly independent, right? I think possibly the most independence are elected officials, right? Somebody is everybody's accountable to someone. And so I think in this legislation, we attempt to move the independence of the office closer, toward more independence, a higher level of independence. And it's really on a continuum. Certainly there are, there can be those that feel like, well, this position may report to the mayor or may not be truly independent for other reasons. But I think there are some things that we have in the legislation that I would consider safeguards that would try to combat that. And we can certainly talk about that in more detail. We're going to talk a little bit about confidentiality, records, whistleblower protection, which in this legislation is consistent with the state legislation. I think we track on that. There's some verbiage in there about the inspector general qualifications for the position. So we'll get kind of into the 394, the legislation establishes the City of Rochester OIG. The scope of the jurisdiction, which is important, includes all city elected officials and employees within the mayoral branch and the council branches, to include the Rochester Police Department. A couple other points: Inspector General is appointed by the mayor, confirmed by council, appointed to a 5-year term, which I believe is, and certainly an AIG recommendation, this fixed term concept is really a safeguard, right? So even though the IG reports to an elected official, there's a 5-year term there that builds some higher level of independence. That's really the point behind that recommendation. And then the other safeguard would be some language that, requires the IG to only be removed for cause. And again, I would look at that as a safeguard around this issue of independence. The duties, there's a section here that talks about the duties. I think probably all of you are generally aware of what my office does now and what an inspector general's office generally, the type of business it conducts. On the investigative side, there are a couple of different types of authorities that IGs have around the country. This legislation doesn't include criminal authority. It does include the ability to work potential criminal investigations and then refer them to the appropriate law enforcement agency when necessary, and obviously to conduct an audit and review of certain operations and programs in the city. And then, additional powers, which would include sworn testimony, administrative subpoena authority, a little different than criminal subpoena authority, right? So administrative subpoena authority would be a step toward, the authority to demand or command records from third parties that are relevant to the investigation to help get to the truth and obtain the facts. There's some language here about independent authority. I think it's 6C7, and it basically just documents that that the IG has some discretion in what they audit, what they investigate. They certainly, would take direction with the mayor or city council regarding any issues that they felt like should be looked at from an investigative standpoint or an audit standpoint. And then the section on duties of others, it's one that, if any of you recall the prior legislation, it's one of the changes where the consultants that we spoke with recommended that we put this language in here, and it just documents the responsibilities of other employees and people that do business with the city with respect to reporting fraud, waste, and abuse and allegations of misconduct, and places some restrictions on coordinating any internal investigations that department heads or the other departments in the city would like to conduct to coordinate that with the OIG. Uh, 6C11 includes the whistleblower protection, and I think, like I mentioned before, that tracks on New York State law and is consistent with that language. And then the final portion, 6C12, adds some verbiage on prohibition of political activities by the Inspector General, and places some restrictions on becoming involved in campaigns, becoming involved in political committees or political parties, or soliciting contributions or attending fundraiser events. I know in the past that's been an issue, so raised in the past. So it specifically addresses that and lays out some guidelines for the Inspector General of the office. So really, there's only a few key differences between OPI now and an Office of Inspector General. The first would be, like I mentioned before, expanded scope of jurisdiction. Right now, OPI's jurisdiction is limited, right, to the mayoral branch, those employees that report up that mayor chain, and this expands it to not only that, but also to include a council and council employees, and also the Rochester Police Department. Higher level of independence, I think I mentioned that. We move from right now, the OPI director serves at the pleasure of the mayor. So we move from that setting to a situation where the IG will serve a 5-year fixed term and can only be removed for cause. So that's that safeguard, or at least a safeguard, to support the idea that the office should maintain a higher level of independence. Greater investigative power, I mentioned that before, just having the ability to take signed sworn statements when it's necessary, having the ability to subpoena witnesses, compel the production of records. Right now, the OPI has no such powers. Our authority to gain records really is limited to city records. And we're able to do that and work with that. But this allows for additional powers to seek third-party records that might be beneficial, and to take signed sworn statements, which at times may be important in being able to get to the bottom of an issue and resolve an allegation. And then I already mentioned this, right now, the OPI director has no prohibition to be involved in any kind of political activities. And so this would actually, place that in the statute and make it very clear what the IG could participate in and what they couldn't with respect to political events. So, I guess in general, what this legislation does, other than those 4 things, I also think that it provides more clarity. If you go back and look at the section in the city charter that created OPI, it's 1 paragraph, and the language is pretty general. So I think just from my personal perspective, I think more clarity is better for someone that's on this side of it. And I would hope that it would be better for those that are on the outside as well. And so that's kind of a brief overview of the legislation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
One of the highlights, and I don't consider it that much of a highlight, is it's something about OPI can't be involved. The Inspector General wouldn't be able to be involved in politics. Is that a problem now? I mean, are you or someone in your office currently involved in political stuff?
No. I in the beginning, when I first took this job, I attended one mayor's ball, and technically that's a fundraiser, right? And it's part of the mayor's team. And this was back in 2014. This is just a personal example. Since that time, that was what, a $300 ticket. A portion of that goes to, I think, the mayor's campaign. So that one event that I attended, I think there are those that believe that that's improper, and that there's some kind of political allegiance that someone in my position would have because I attended that. So, and I learned from that, and I haven't attended another one. So I think because this language, I basically operate consistent with the language that's in this new legislation. But I think it's a good, whoever holds this position, I think it's a good idea to clarify that.
I have a couple of other questions, but before that, any of my other colleagues have questions for Mr. Weir or comments?
I do. Go ahead.
Councilmember Lupien.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Mitch.
No, that's okay. I'm actually just about to be able to go back on video, so you can go first.
All right, go ahead, Lupien, and then Gruber.
Sure. I really have some concerns about the reporting structure. And I was just kind of looking at the website, and one of the peer reviews that was posted there talks about how, the current OPI reporting to the mayor could really result in a conflict of interest. Should the mayor be under scrutiny? And, I don't see that this legislation changes that. Can you speak to why the decision was made to continue having it reported under the mayor and having the mayor appoint and control the budget?
Well, I can speak to the fact that there are some safeguards in there, the 5-year fixed term, the language that basically states the IG can't be removed other than for cause. So I think that kind of moves us toward that higher level of independence. But I'd certainly, Mayor, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
So I think that we modeled this off of what other cities do, and that is what this was modeled off of. And we looked at and talked to national experts and ran it by them before resubmitting it to council. And that was, they made some specific recommendations around things that we should, language and other things that we should change. And that did not come up. If there is a different model that we should be looking at, we're definitely open to that. We want to make sure that we have a office that has the accreditation and the authority that it needs to be able to do its job.
Yeah, I would say, the legislation really calls out that, council has currently initiated an investigation, and this legislation prohibits that. And so having it be under the mayor, I would think from that perspective would be an issue too.
This legislation doesn't prohibit council from anything. Council's authority is in the charter. It would never impact, the IG's office doesn't impact council or its authority at all. What it provides is an independent authority based on what other cities currently have in their IG. This would not impact council's authority to do any investigations or anything at all.
The way that I read it, it said that no independent or no agency in the administration or council can initiate its own investigation without going through the IG's office. And I will say too, I hear that you modeled it after other cities, but the peer recommendations that were listed on our website list that as a concern. So I don't know, who the peers were, but that holds some weight with me.
Yeah, council member, I can speak to that. The peer review was a peer review that we sought, that I sought to review the portion of my office that does fall under some accreditation standards, which would be on the auditing side. So the peer review was conducted by a CPA firm, and it's conducted every 3 years to ensure that we do everything in line with both the international internal audit standards and the governmental audit standards. So that report, you're right, that report did highlight the issue, one of the very issues that we're talking about, which is this idea of impairment. And that's the word that they use in the auditing world. But the idea, and I think what the peer reviewer said was, if I were going to audit the travel expenses of the mayor, that it might be better that I hire somebody else to do that, right? That I bring in a third party to do that from an independent standpoint, that my independent, it's not that I couldn't do it. It's not that I personally think that I could do a good job, an independent objective job. It's just, what will the third party believe, right? There's independence in fact, and there's independence in appearance. And that independence in appearance is what other people that view what we do from the outside, how will they view it? Will it have any credibility? And I think the bottom line with all of these steps is, how do we build an office that has as much credibility to the public and the confidence of the public and you, council members, and the mayor and elected officials and city employees? How do we move that office in that direction?
Thanks. Just have one more follow-up question. You know, there's other ethics infrastructure at the city. You know, we have an ethics board, and you know, would it, and investigation that's ongoing, you know, from the council. So I guess two things. One, you know, could we have a broader look at ethics, not just, you know, going from OPI to IG, but kind of looking at the looking at it holistically, and, you know, potentially even like go as far as a charter commission. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought on the second part. Maybe you can respond to that first part.
So, I mean, I think that council is well within their right to put forth, you set policy. So if you want to look at the ethics board or ethics review, you're well within your right to do that. The administration doesn't stand in the way of you doing that right now. So I think that what we're trying to do and what we're specifically talking about right now is something that we raised a number of years ago, which was to try and make the OPI office and transition it into IG's office. And so we want to bring forth this legislation and resubmit it. So I know that Tim is talking about the auditing portion of this, but after speaking to the former mayor of Philadelphia, as well as we did send, you know, a copy or submit a copy of this to Bloomberg's team. And, you know, they gave us some advice on some of the language, you know, sort of because of the fiscal crisis. You know, some of the language was that you must or you shall. And you may not want to get there to do all of that right away without having the finances. So we sort of changed some of that language. So, but this is a open document, right? So the reason why we wanted to submit it so that you have it, so that you can review it, so that you can make recommendations, and we can edit it. This is our version to be submitted. Council can amend as they see fit. But this is something that we review based on what we know, and Tim did a lot of research on putting this together.
Thank you. And just the last part of the thought is that, you know, seeing as how we have kind of an ongoing investigation that really is an ethics investigation around, you know, the Daniel Prue case, that could show some gaps and things that we can improve on. And just wondering what the timing of this legislation that we could, you know, benefit from what we learn. Do you have any, like, what's your time frame?
So, you know, we submitted the legislation. At this point in time, it's in your wheelhouse. So it's, what's your time frame? I think that's where, you know, this is our recommendation, and council can edit, council can hold the legislation until after, you know, the information from the independent investigation comes through. I know that it's not just investigating the administration, is also investigating, you know, council. So I think that we should, if the recommendation is that you hold off, and, you know, that we hold off on approving this until after that information comes through, you know, that's, you know, well within your right to do so. We just wanted to put this forth to have a discussion on it, and, you know, for people to be able to amend and put forth their recommendations as well. I just think that Tim did an extensive job of getting and talking to people for this legislation, and sending it, to different, experts and trying to get information. And so right now, this is, what we have, and we welcome any suggestions. And if the recommendation is that we hold off until after, after the Chelly is done with his and gives his recommendations, council is well within their right to do so.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ware, one quick question. Another one of the key points that someone said to me around an independent reporting structure is they said the IG should not report directly to the city council, legislator, mayor, governor, or other political figures that may be subject to an investigation at some point. Does that mean, can you talk to me about some of these elected IGs that are out there versus ones that are reporting to another elected official and being supervised by those folks? Are there other models that are out there where the IG is truly independent, like a comptroller that's elected?
I think the short answer is there are elected officials such as comptrollers. I think Buffalo has an elected comptroller, I'm pretty sure. So, but that is, I would guess that their role is less investigative and more auditing, accounting, financial examination role. I'm not aware of any IG at the local level that's elected. If you look around just in the state of New York, you've got the Yonkers IG, which if you look at their legislation, it's kind of benchmarked against the AIG legislation. There might be a few minor differences, but it has the fixed term. I believe it reports to the mayor. I think if just here locally, the Monroe County Office of Public Integrity, they created legislation a couple years ago, which basically is benchmarked off some of the same language. I think if you look that up, and I think, the director there reports to the county exec. So I think if you look at the IG of New York City, or the former IG of New York City, that was one of the consultants I spoke with, she, reported to the mayor. If you looked at the inspector general for the state of New York, I'm going to guess that person has a level of independence, but reports to the governor. So I don't know. I mean, I could do more research.
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. Just a question.
I think it's more common that the IG reports to an elected official or a group of officials,
right,
with some safeguards to help maintain and protect its independence. And I think that is where the 5-year term and some of the other language, I think that's where it applies.
All right, and then talk to me about the interplay of this. Actually, talk to me about the interplay currently with your current office and the current board of ethics that we have, and then what would this inspector general, what would be their relationship to the board of ethics, which is supposed to be a organization that also is supposed to address ethical issues and concerns that are brought up.
Right. So there is some overlap. I mean, currently I serve as a secretary of the board of ethics, as the mayor's representative on the board, but it is a separate hat that I wear. We administer the financial disclosure process using resources here in my office. And I prepared the agenda as the secretary, and the minutes and draft advisory opinions for review by the board. But the board is separate from OPI. The board is basically an advisory board to provide some input on, as a resource. I mean, if you read some of the language and when it was created, it's really created to be an advisory board to employees who are seeking some type of ethical opinion on whether they have a conflict of interest or whether or not they can sell a product to the city, those type of issues, right? So the interplay really is only that I'm the secretary. Now, there are times where something will come into my office directed at OPI, but then they'll ask me to send it to the ethics board. And so in those situations, I defer to the board that I'm on, and I allow them to take a look at it. And sometimes they'll refer back to me if it's some issue relating to a city employee and an allegation that I should resolve on my side of the house. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's really two hats that I wear, two roles that I play. I don't suspect, depending on kind of what the IG model really turns out to look like, I think there's still a place for the Board of Ethics, and certainly some coordination would be necessary, and that takes place now. I expect that it would take place under a new model.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yep, President Scott, and then Councilmember Gruber. I think you also had a question.
Oh, Councilmember Gruber, you may have been out there first.
Sure, I'll be very fast. I have three questions, but I hope they're pretty quick. The first one, Director Weir, is you keep mentioning in the slides that the new powers would include the Rochester Police Department. Does the current OPI not include the Rochester Police Department?
Correct. Currently, I have no authority, no oversight to investigate the actions of sworn officers.
Got it. Okay. The second question is related to budget. Is the expectation that if this legislation went through, is the expectation that there would be additional staffing requirements for the new office? Is there anything about the existing staff you have now, people who would be impacted, lose their job, have to retest, anything like that?
There may be a discussion about additional resources if we take on expanded jurisdiction, in particular, resolving allegations relating to sworn officers. Obviously, that's an increased workload. So from that perspective, that discussion may take place. I still would have an audit function as part of the Inspector General's office. So the skill set I have here is important, and I would certainly want to maintain the experience I have here. There may be discussions about moving the audit strategy in different directions. Some of the things we do now can be fairly routine, inventories, that type of thing, cash handling, depending on the staffing and the other projects we might want to take on the audit side, things that might be a little bit more complex, a little bit more long-term. There might be discussions about that, but so I wouldn't see where anybody here wouldn't be able to fit into a new model with their current skill.
And let me just jump in here for a second. That's why you'll see some language that instead of saying shall says may, because of course we are in some fiscal challenges right now. And so if it doesn't mean that it will start immediately. These are things that we would have to give the authority work their way up to as it pertains to what we could financially, sort of afford.
Got it. Okay, thank you. My last question is I'm going to kind of piggyback on things that have already been alluded to by Councilmember Evans and Councilmember Lupien. But I was taking a look. BJ and Katie sent us the notes from the work session that you all had back when this was initially up, I guess 2015, 2016. And one of the things in the work session was, in that case, actually the proposal was for the OGI to not report up to the mayor's office. It was actually for it to be independent. At least that's according to the documents that I looked at. I'm wondering what's the reason for more specifically, why was it that way then and why has it changed now?
I don't remember it being different.
I don't remember that.
You remember that?
I don't.
I don't remember. I don't remember. I think that it was always that it reported to the executive. To the mayor's office. Yeah. It reported to the mayor's office, and it had 5-year fixed term and could only be dismissed for cause. Not reporting to the mayor was never part of that. I don't remember that. You can go back and look at the original. You can go back and look at the original legislation that was before.
Yeah, and I also might just be not understanding the context of the notes of that work session. So I should take advantage of the fact that President Scott was around for that conversation too.
Look at the language of the original legislation. I mean, that might have been a question that was asked, but the legislation always had the according to the executive.
Okay, thank you.
All right, President Scott.
Yes, thank you. Who defines cause and how is cause defined in terms of the termination of the OIG director?
I believe the language, it uses the word misconducts and malfeasance. So
As determined by whom?
As I think it's determined through a hearing.
Consisting of whom?
We would have to go back and do some research on that. I don't have that answer offhand.
Okay. All right.
But generally, it would be a panel. It wouldn't be just one person.
All right. We'll peg that one. So the police would be investigated by PSS, OIG, and PAB?
So in other cities, there are certain instances where the IG would come into a police investigation if there was some allegations that PSS did not do their review properly. And so they would come in under those guidelines, or if someone believed that they could not go to PSS, and this is not necessarily, regarding a civilian situation. It may be a situation between two police officers. It may be a situation between a civilian, employee of the police department that may not feel that they have a place to go to investigate an officer and don't feel comfortable with going to PSS. And so that's why you would give that person a home to go to. And this would give them the ability to go to the IG.
So I think to sort of gather that question together a little more tightly, it is about determining how, because when this was originally written, there was no PAB.
Correct.
There was the Civilian Review Board, and they did not have that extensive a charge. So the question really is about how you coordinate, how does all of that fit together? Because there could conceivably be a lot going on with one situation. I mean, there'd have to be some understandings about who's on first.
Right. So my understanding, and maybe, this is something that over time we can sort of research as we go forward with the legislation and developing a, guidelines if council supports going forward with this, is that the Police Accountability Board reviews police officers that are being accused of doing something against a civilian, against one of our citizens. They are not necessarily reviewing, and I may be wrong with this, a situation where a police officer is being accused of doing something against another police officer.
Well, it says any, and that sort of would be something like Carrio's law, where a cop turns another cop in and that kind of thing. So It says any. We would have to do some work on that to make sure there is that kind of coordination and understanding.
Okay. We can definitely further research that.
Okay. And in terms of the financial implications, I heard you say that some of the stuff says may instead of shall. But I remember that one of the concerns also early on when we were looking at this was this whole concept of empire building. So I don't know how that stands now, whether or not that is the direction. How expansive might this become? Would it also require upgrades of the current staff? What are the short and the long-term implications financially?
So right now there are no implications financially because we are in the beginning stages and definitely understand that we're in the middle of a pandemic. So building an empire or building a staff of 20 in the IG's office is definitely not something that we are looking to do. However, in the future, as the IG office starts to expand investigations and other things that they may be called to look into, that may dictate and that may say that you may need some more resources that you can look into. It's going to take a while to get, accreditation and to get the, to comply with some of the rules and regulations for the office to get accredited. And so we would want to make sure that we're doing that as well. And so this would be sort of a phased in look at investigations, look at what they're doing, and do it in such a way that it takes into account what their fiscal budget is at this point in time, understanding that we are in some challenging times. And so I know that that is something that Tim definitely considered as he researched this again. And that's why we're very careful in not to put in shall right away or you must do this, because of the fact that we know that these are some things that we will have to phase in over time.
So finally, I'll let you go. I recall that there was a concern about the actual cost of the accreditation itself, whether it's from this association or however you get this rank, that there was a cost associated with getting that status.
I don't remember that offhand, but that is something that we definitely can research. Tim, do you know if there's a cost?
I believe there is a cost, and that discussion may have centered around the cost of bringing in the peer reviewers, because when they come in, they look at both the investigative side and the audit side. Remember, before I mentioned that we had the peer review on the audit side. So what we would do if we became an IG is now we would move over to that accreditation agency, the AIG, and then they would bring in people that could look at the investigative side, make sure we're adhering to those standards. Also, they would bring in people that could look at the auditing side, make sure that we're adhering basically the same standards that we're held to now. They adopt the same ones, the IIA and the Yellow Book. So the cost of that is borne by, the office is going to be reviewed. I think that's pretty common with any kind of accreditation. I don't know any numbers. I certainly can dig into that. I wouldn't think it's exorbitant. And I believe it's every 3 years.
Yeah, so, it was significant as I recall. So if you get that back to us, I'd appreciate it.
We definitely will. We'll definitely.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any other questions? Just one last question. Mr. Councilmember Melendez.
Yeah, most of my questions were already asked, but I guess at a very high level, I know this was introduced in the past, and I just wondered, why do we need to do this change right now or in the near future? What's the high level answer to that question?
So we're in a different state at this point in time, and the OPI director before had ran into some challenges, especially some challenges when it comes down to independence, one, but also employees that might have wanted to be whistleblowers but didn't feel necessarily that they could actually, that this office was something that was, going to take their complaint as serious as they wanted to, because they looked at it as not being independent. So we looked at it, we introduced it in the past, it didn't move forward. And so now we're bringing it back again because, we recognize that there are some challenges that we have, and we want to make sure that we have an internal investigative office that is independent and has the ability to do the work and for the public to understand that they're that this person is going to do their work without fear of retribution or anything like that. And I think that that's very, very important. Other cities have IG offices. They don't have OPI offices. I think that Rochester is very unique to that. And that's the reason why we weren't able to be accredited. This wasn't started by my administration. It was started by a previous administration. And, we have worked very, very hard to make sure that we are aligned with, with national standards and bringing our departments and trying to get us up to national standards. And this is one where, when it comes down to investigations, having independence, being able to do the work and have the public understand that this person, is on a fixed term, that they, have the ability and the authority to do their job. They cannot be dismissed. Nobody's going to mess with them. And even though that isn't the case, even today, the appearance of it, or the thought of it in and of itself can be a problem. And so we want to make sure that we wanted to bring it forth again to discuss and to see whether council is, given the state, given the times that we're in, open to, bringing forth this and changing the OPI office into what other cities have, which is a IG's office.
I just want to piggyback, talking about bringing us in line with other cities. It's my understanding that, at least on, the audit side, that all the other major cities in New York have an elected comptroller, Buffalo, Syracuse, New York City, Albany. And so, it sounds like that might be something that we could look at. And in that structure, would the IG report to the comptroller? Is that how it would work?
So I'm not sure. That's not something that we looked into. And let me just be clear, because, I didn't make that determination, that the charter change and different things that happened in the charter happened when we switched from a city manager to the current structure that we have. And I think that was back in the 1980s. And so, that I don't know why we didn't do an elected comptroller. I'm not sure who the IG reports to, in those other cities. And I do believe that many of them, as far as I understand, in New York City and Philadelphia and other places, they report to the mayor, but they have this independence where they have the 5-year term. They can't be dismissed except for cause, which I know that we have to, provide some clarification on what that dismissal for cause is. And is it a panel? Do they have to become specific charges and things like that? And we will make sure that we get that to you. But that's something that we can definitely look into.
Okay, we're at the end of our hour. President Scott, I'll turn it back over to you.
I have no further comments, and unless someone else does, we can adjourn.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.